We learn that tragedy, especially when it happens in public, is a swift, blinding flash, a moment of inevitable, tragic finality. But what if someone helped with the tragedy? What if the official story was really a neatly built mausoleum meant to bury a reality that would be quieted? This isn't the death of a famous person. It's the painful echo of a cry that the country had to forget. The caregiver, a woman whose name remains irrelevant to the history she witnessed, first felt the weight of the silence, not when the police arrived, but in the unnaturally controlled tremor of the telephone ringing at 3:17 a.m., an hour when the city's concrete heart was supposed to be completely dormant. The call's unique frequency, which was short and clinical, took away the uncontrolled violence and replaced it with something far scarier, a preemptive calculation. She had worked in that world, a world of private homes, subtle arrangements, and star management for long enough to know that when something this big happens, the truth has already been put in quarantine. Menglong, the name that had once moved millions of followers, had become nothing more than a carefully positioned anonymous casualty, fallen from a luxury apartment's fifth-floor balcony that official statements would later describe only as an accident, or more vaguely a tragedy of unknown cause. The story started as a whisper that was quickly silenced by an all-seeing hand. But the caregiver couldn't stop staring at the broken glass in the apartment window, which was a piece of physical evidence that there had been a fight that the new, required silence wouldn't let her admit to even herself. The subsequent days were a masterclass in choreographed sorrow. The management team released a statement heavy with carefully chosen euphemisms. The national media outlets dutifully recycled the approved, sanitized details. And a million questions from a bewildered public were simply left hanging in the digital ether, unanswered and unacknowledged, until they eventually faded into the noise of the next fleeting news cycle. The caregiver's job was to go through the person's things, which felt less like mourning and more like an organized erasure. They carefully listed the clothes, scripts, and untouched bottles of expensive cologne, all of which now seemed like props in a play that had suddenly ended in the middle of a performance. She was subconsciously looking for a sign, like a diary entry, a crumpled note, or an unexplained stain. That could explain how a man who was so obviously and vibrantly successful could just fall out of existence without warning. But the apartment was spotless, free of any story that might go against the official decree. It was this pristine emptiness, the purposeful lack of an emotional impression, that began to wrench the pit of her stomach, whispering that the actual crime was not the death itself, but the methodical sanitization of its setting. The first stillness, the one enforced from above, was ultimately shattered by a secret. Ragged noise, the fragmentary confession of the one person who knew more than they were authorized to share, a confidant who appeared from the shadows of Menglong's inner circle. This guy, whom we shall call the confessor, talked not in whole phrases, but in tight, frightened gasps during clandestine meetings held in the chilly, faceless shelter of poorly illuminated parking garages. The tale conveyed in raw, muttered bits over the hiss of a muffled motor. The confessor did not talk of the fall, but of the hours before the collapse, describing a combustible atmosphere dense with unacknowledged resentments and the heavy metallic flavor of treachery. The caretaker found herself in the terrible situation of being the solitary repository for a reality that could not be stated. A silent librarian storing information that, if published, would not just scandalize, but would ignite the entire delicate political edifice around the star's legacy. The confessor reported a gathering that was not a party, but a confrontation. A scene involving not just the actor, but an unspecified number of others. Their presence in the apartment, a purposeful act of intimidation that evolved effortlessly into something crueler and more primitive. The conversation was limited, the words weighty and weaponized. He knew too much. They wanted to send a message. The caregiver remarked the confessor's terrifying detachment when telling the initial verbal attack. But the voice would crack when describing the move to physical compulsion, a breakdown that portrayed the full dread of the experience more clearly than any descriptive phrase. The narrative began to morph from a sad accident into a targeted, purposeful, sustained act of cruelty. While the official record remained resolutely fixed, a simple, lonely, last error committed at the edge of a balcony. In the confined space of the apartment, the geography of fear was meticulously mapped out in the confessor's halting narrative, detailing the specific rooms, Used for the confinement, the different textures of the surfaces where the struggle occurred, and the precise moment when resistance gave way to a desperate, crushing despair. The caregiver began to see the crime scene not as an apartment, but as a temporary, portable prison, where the victim's fame and wealth offered absolutely no insulation against a focused, malicious intent, leaving him utterly stripped of his public persona and reduced to a fragile, unprotected human being. The confessor's descriptions of the atmosphere, the sudden punctuated silences, the strained laughter of the aggressors, the constant threat of a violence that was always imminent, yet somehow delayed, painted a psychological portrait of sustained terror that was arguably more damaging than the eventual physical injuries. The weight of this revelation, the gradual, torturous awareness of what the actor had undergone in the hours preceding up to his death, began to reinforce the caregiver's guilt. The load of harboring this unrecognized horror pushing down on her moral conscience. The official inquiry had been quick and dismissive, ruling that the trauma was compatible with a fall from a large height, therefore neatly closing the case and assuring the narrative's confinement. But the confessor supplied the critical, unseen evidence, a secondary recording. This was not the normal ambient surveillance footage, but a private, handheld video of visceral, frightening insight into the prior attack that was never designed for public consumption, but existed as a perverse record of the perpetrator's power. The caregiver now confronted a horrible moral paradox. The presence of this tape meant the truth was maintained, yet the act of seeing or having it constituted an open declaration of war against the strong authorities that had so meticulously engineered the official quiet. It was proof, the confessor muttered, the statement hanging in the air like a menace, but it was also a weapon. The caregiver's mental conflict, centered on the calculation of guilt, was her cooperation in the quiet, saving herself from career ruin. Or was it an abandoning of the victim who had trusted her? The confessor was demanding a decision, not of exposure, but of safekeeping, urging that the film be removed, protected, and kept dormant until a day that could never arrive, a future where the apparatus of power would weaken enough for the truth to breathe. This was the moment the caregiver crossed the Rubicon, accepting the burden of the secret and transforming from a neutral bystander into a participant in the cover-up, motivated not by malice, but by a chilling, pragmatic fear that to reveal the truth prematurely would only result in its immediate and permanent destruction. The weight of the secret now appeared physically, a persistent knot of dread tucked behind her ribs that reminded her with every pulse of the delicate, explosive truth she held. The screenplay must now contain the brief, emotional dialogue, whispered and fractured, to heighten the suspense inside the plot. The caretaker recalled the precise, halting words of the confessor, narrating the closing hours, words that were purposefully ambiguous, yet devastatingly clear. They took his phone. A pause, a ragged breath. He just kept saying, "Please, no more." Another long, awful silence. I saw the glint of the metal then. Nothing. Just the quiet after. These fragmented remarks, retained only in the caregiver's memory, formed the genuine transcript of the incident, immeasurably more truthful than the sterile official record, documenting the terrible decline from verbal hostility to the ultimate, lethal act of violence. The caretaker started to comprehend that the torture was not only physical, but a planned psychological destruction of the actor's dignity, aiming to shatter his will and make his final end a predetermined conclusion. The presence of the torture video was a ghost in the machine of the official silence, a phantom limb that continuously twitched with the promise of revelation. Yet accessing it became a complicated undertaking that required traversing a network of faulty digital firewalls and back. The caregiver utilized her professional contacts and subtle, untraceable techniques to ultimately retrieve the encrypted file, a procedure that seemed like stealing a crown treasure from a tightly guarded vault. A time of intense dedication to a risky, solitary justice. When she finally opened the file, the simple, mundane interface of the video player, a progress bar, a pause button stood in stark, grotesque contrast to the raw, unspeakable violence that was about to unfold on the screen. A truth so horrifying it threatened to break the silence, not with a whisper, but with a thunderous, undeniable roar. Whatever occurred next, she knew with chilling certainty would stay with her forever, a mark upon her soul that could never be washed clean. The watching of the tape was not only information collecting, it was an emotional explosion, an irreparable event that broke through the caregiver's professional detachment, replacing it with a searing, sympathetic terror. The video corroborated the worst of the confessor's broken narrative, the premeditated cruelty, the physical brutality that transcended the wounds explicable by a casual fall, and the image of a renowned, attractive man transformed to an object of extended pain. The actor's frantic, guttural pleadings were the genuine music to his dying hours, a sound that skipped the ear and echoed straight in the chest, demanding an instant emotional response from the audience. For the first time since the phone call, the caregiver allowed herself to fully weep the tears, a silent, private protest against the organized national apathy, an acknowledgement of the limitations of human empathy when confronted with a cruelty so severe. The complexity of the moral decision dissipated, replaced by the soul. Overpowering urge to give witness and guarantee this anguish was not utterly discredited by the official falsehood. The caregiver began a moment of serious thought, considering the weight of her secret and the potential of atonement, not by large, public acts, but through a quiet, careful process of personal reckoning. The script pivots somewhat, addressing the chilling psychological impact on the confessor as well. Realizing their common participation in the original silence and their mutual, urgent desire to now find a method to respect the deceased without inviting terrible repercussions. Was forgiveness conceivable for those who saw, or for those who were complicit in the aftermath? The explanation remained elusive, a tangled knot of terror and moral need that constituted their shared underground life. They were joined by a dead man's secret, bonded together in a horrifying personal conspiracy against a falsehood that spanned the highest reaches of authority, compelling them to live eternally on the edge of their own lives. The resolution was not a spectacular burst of truth in the public arena, but a calm, planned deployment. A choice to leak the film not to a sensationalist press, but to a carefully selected foreign institution outside the immediate reach of the powerful silent. The video's gradual, creeping emergence onto the world stage began to break the immaculate facade, causing the original story to be re-examined, leading to rumors of an inquiry that, while first opposed, could no longer be totally denied. The impact of the truth was not an immediate, tidy win, but a lengthy, tough fight. A tribute to the reality that certain secrets are so deadly that their discovery necessitates a total reworking of the structures created to contain them. The caregiver, having performed her final agonizing duty, retreated back into the shadows, a witness who exchanged her peace for the burden of a horrifying knowledge, forever defined by the night the nation was silenced. And the truth was only permitted to speak in the fragmented, desperate language of a secret, brutal video.